With the Polaroid, because it was so instant and you got to verify it, there is a discrepancy between what you tried to capture and what you saw.
Perhaps, Wim, you'd like to say something about the restoration itself and the process that's gone into it and your involvement in it.
Yeah, you've seen something, you've seen a survivor. That little movie was shot before some of you were born, I might say. Yes. Yep. And on 16 millimeter. And we were all so young and unexperienced. So happy it got distributed, even worldwide, and we made almost 100 prints of that negative, and then it was dead. It was gone. It was practically, couldn't make a print of it anymore. And the further distribution of the film really suffered from the fact that it was a lost negative. And only due to the wizardry of digital restoration could we scan frame by frame the original negative, take all the damage away, the breaks, the scratches, the giant scratches, and at the time 16 millimeter was glued frame, the two frames were glued, and the frames they were glued together were jumpy, and you see half the frame was covered with the glue, so it was unwatchable. And now it is finally, it looks better than it's actually looked the very first day when we screened it. And I'm very happy. Sound is decent too. In between the optical track sounded so awful now. It's a film that survived, and it's a survivor from the good old analog days, and I'm happy that you've seen it in better conditions now. Thank you for coming.
So speaking of analog, obviously Polaroid photography is quite central to this film, particularly the first half. And just thinking about the exhibition that's on at the Photographers Gallery right now, it would be quite unusual normally to have an exhibition devoted to a single film type or a single camera. One can't imagine an exhibition of Ilford photography or just of Hasselblad photography, but somehow it seems to make perfect sense with Polaroid. What was it that made, in your view, Polaroid different or unique as a form of photography?
It was something else. It was not like photography that we knew before, and it was not like digital photography that came afterwards. It was its own little thing in between, almost like a genius outburst of the last genius outburst of the analog age. It produced something instantly, and of course now everything is instant that you all do. I don't think any of you is not taking pictures. I'm sitting here with lots of colleagues, they're all photographers. And Polaroid had something extremely attractive to it because you could share it right away. And again, something you're all used to today, but at the time it was something exciting that you could take a picture of somebody and that person was still in front of you when you had the picture, not just a picture, but a physical print of it. And that is the drama, because you always felt, at least I did, like, yeah, I had to give it away. I took thousands and thousands of Polaroids. I kept a few thousand. But 2/3 I just had to give away, because I felt too that this object belonged more to that person who was on it than to me, because it was a piece of the world. And as if I had almost stolen from it, because it was a physical thing. It was not a virtual thing. It was actually existing, a physically existing piece of the world, a duplicate, a doppelganger, and that was exciting. And it was not like photography. Photography, you would see somebody with a camera, and then you wonder when you would ever see that picture. Maybe in a month or never. photography with Polaroids. You could just wait, and then there it was, and you could look at it together. You can look at it developing together. And that was a fantastic kind of sharing that really had nothing today to do with the kind of sharing we now all do. I mean, I can take your picture now, and if you give me your numbers, we can all share it. We can all share it afterwards. But that was a different thing. Polaroid was a different kind of sharing. You knew your friends because they were real people, and you would give them something real. So it was fabulous, and it had nothing to do with photography. It was more fun. It was a little reckless also.
So in relation to that need to share, and anybody who's taken Polaroid photographs knows that experience of having to hand over the image to the person you've photographed. There's also a scene in Alice in the Cities where I think it's the second to last Polaroid that's taken in the film, where Philip hands the camera over to Alice, or Alice takes the camera from him. Is there a sense in this sort of photography that you also have to share the camera as well as the images? And the reason I was wondering about this is that in the exhibition, there's at least two photos of Robbie Muller, your DOP on this film, and there was an exhibition last year of Robbie Muller's cinematography in Amsterdam, and as part of that very big exhibition, there were also Polaroids by Robbie Muller, and I was wondering, is this because you were sharing that camera, or because it was a sort of common language and all of you were Polaroiding? I was just wondering if that was the...
During the film, we only had one. It was a prototype. Mm-hmm. It was our most precious asset on the set. We only had one. The Polaroid, the land camera, had given us this one, and that was 6 months before they started to market it. Nobody had ever seen like it, and I had to sign. The only thing I had to sign is that the film was not going to come out before their camera was on the market. And then we had this camera, and of course we couldn't buy the film yet. It wasn't out. Neither the camera nor the film was out. So we had I think, a dozen packs of film, and that was then very precious because it had to survive the movie. Mm-hmm. And even when little Alice took the camera and took a picture of Rudiger, you're very much aware how anxious he is that he does the right thing. She does the right thing, because it was the only one we had, and every now and then I had it, and I could take a few leftover pictures of the film, and Robbie had it. But you bet as soon as the camera was out, we all went and bought some. It was like, that's the way they get you, you know, they give you one.
Yeah.
The mafia does this. They give you a little heroin for free. No, they do that. Do that to kids, and then they have them. But, I mean, this was not like that. It was fantastic, and we loved it, and Robbie became a very dedicated photographer with Polaroids, and it was also good for another reason. Good that I can mention it. Because at that time, Alice in the Cities, other films we did the next year, Kings of the Road and stuff, these were cameras. The only person who saw something was the DOP, or the guy who looked through the lens. Nobody else saw anything. And there was no video playout or anything. And you couldn't watch it in the evening on your monitor or on a TV set. You had to wait for Alice. We had to wait basically until we finished with the movie until we saw the rushes, because we developed them in Europe. And the first 2 weeks in America, nobody saw anything. But if you took a Polaroid of the shot, then at least you had an idea of the shots you've done. And in Kings of the Road, we Polaroided practically every shot before we did it, because then you could also see the lighting. And it was the only way to have access to a film before the rushes eventually came out. I did all these road movies, so that it always took weeks until the negative arrived at a lab and was sent back, and then we were traveling again. If you're traveling, it's difficult to see film. You had to find some dinky movie theater somewhere that at midnight would show you your rushes. Otherwise, you couldn't see it. Mm-hmm. It was unwatchable. I mean, in the sense that...
in the book, you talking about Polaroid photography, you say that all cameras produce their own aesthetic. Now, there's all sorts of there's everything from pictures of toast and typewriters in the book. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, particularly in relationship to Polaroid cameras and the kinds of images that you sort of are obliged to take, or that it encourages you to take.
I think in the little scene with Alice when she's taking the picture of Philip, you see a little bit. It was basically pointing the camera in that direction, and you never, in the viewfinder, never really exactly saw the frame. It was approximate. You saw it vaguely. And with the SX70, you put whatever you were photographing smack in the middle because it was a square picture. So with the square picture, you were almost, the camera really forced you to center whatever you photographed. Mm-hmm. So most faces are always right in the middle. With other pictures, if you have a square format, you never put people in the middle. You always put them a little sideways because you learn that from paintings that in a rectangular picture, you don't put the things in the middle. You put them a little on the outside. So, and also the way you handle a camera and especially the Polaroid camera, that SX70 forced you to hold it with your left hand and pull up the top thing. You saw that a couple of times, and then look through and release it here, and that free hand would then take the. So there was a physical thing to it, and that after a while your hands and your arms did the picture. You didn't really need you anymore. It was a bodily thing, and obviously when you look through a Leica viewfinder, there is a much different attention to the framing. Or if you look down into one of these cameras that had the top view, it's all very different. Cameras create their own tradition of aesthetics. So the Polaroid aesthetic was formed by the square format and by the way you are holding it and forced to look into it. And I know lots of people who never really actually saw what they photographed because they were you had to hold it in this crooked angle. I mean, the camera wasn't flat, but you had to hold it crooked, and many people just never got it. They're now marketing it again. I wonder if today's kids can deal with holding it crookedly.
I'm not sure about this, but I think that Instagram works on a square format as well. So I'm wondering if that format has acclimatized people to that's the square image again, and this might explain.
But there's something intimate about it. There's something, the square format is something cozy. I don't know, can I explain it? It's something that it fits better on your refrigerator. Yeah. Let me remember. You see, Philip Winter is pretty much of a failure because he was sent to America to write about the American landscape for a magazine, obviously, because then in between he's at this agency, and all he ever got to do was take these pictures, and I don't think we ever see him write. And I think he was there's a beautiful expression of the writer's block. I think he's suffering from a severe case of the writer's block, and the Polaroids maybe help him to just remember what he wants to write eventually. And I think little Alice has unblocked him. I think in the end he can go home and write because he went to therapy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You see, it's one of the big differences about making a Polaroid and photography. As a photographer looking through a viewfinder, knowing, at least the old day of photography, I'm not talking about photography today when you see your picture on the back of the screen, but the old day when you look through a viewfinder, and then it's a beautiful word. You found your view, and you released it, and you knew that you were going to see it maybe a week later or 2 weeks later on your contact sheets, but it was a very conscious act, and you got what you wanted. And anyway, when you saw your contact sheets weeks later, whatever you saw was what you got, and the act was weeks ago, the act of taking the picture. And with the Polaroid, because it was so instant and you got to verify it, there is a discrepancy between what you tried to capture and what you saw. And I remember that you could do as many as you want. It was always the same. There was always a little anxiety and a little excitement about, for the older generations of Polaroids to peel away, or later with the SX70 to see it appear. There was always a surprise. It was always slightly off because it was so immediate. See, and if you see it on your contact sheets weeks later, nothing is off because your memory is on, and you were so more careful about choosing the choice anyway. The Polaroid, it drove me crazy sometimes, that it was almost approximative, and that was also the fun of it. That would make it so free, and it was carefree. Photography takes itself more seriously than taking Polaroids. Frankly, my influence on photography is strictly painting. I didn't know much about the history of photography. When I finally discovered great photographers, that was much later. I remember I saw a show of Walker Evans in the late 70s, and I was shocked. I was shocked that existed, and I hadn't known anything about it. I was informed strictly by painting, about framing, about how to do an image. Photography in my book didn't exist until much later. And I've never been really influenced by other photographers because I've been so much influenced when I grew up by painters, because that's all I ever wanted to be, was a painter, and I got sidetracked. I'm a failed painter. Robbie and I started to work together when Robbie was still assistant camera. He was working as focus puller, as assistant to a great, legendary Dutch cameraman, Gerard Vandenberg, in the 60s. And I met him, I was still in film school, and I got a job as a supporting actor in a film. I had very long hair, and that qualified me for the job. And I saw the cameraman. I was very interested. The first time I saw a professional cameraman at work, and I watched his assistant. And Robbie was his assistant. He also had very long hair. Was pretty cool. And I was impressed. Pulling focus, I knew from own experience, was the damnest job. And Robbie was so cool. He pulled focus with one hand and the other hand in his pocket, believe it or not, and in his pocket he was rolling cigarettes. Put it on and smet and light it, still be in the scene and pull focus, and had another cigarette, that a self-made one. I thought, wow, that's the greatest cameraman ever. And then he made my first student movie, and after that we did each and every film for the next 12 years. He had a fantastic eye, and he became like a hero for a whole generation of DOPs in the 70s. Most of all with a picture called American Friend. That was the holy grail for cinematographers at that time.